two more rules, revolutionary rules of the camp. One, nothing is episodic, and two, nothing is cultural. I am using cultural tonight to refer to apparent external pressures, something arising outside of a man and affecting him. But these two rules are in-laws, if not blood kin, and that is nothing is episodic and nothing is cultural. Some of you have been around long enough that years ago I used an apparently fairly simple explanation to try to get all of this going in the right direction. And it was examples wherein I would simply pick out what appeared to be an episode. A man goes into a 7-Eleven store in the morning on the way to work to get a cup of coffee, a pack of cigarettes, gum, and he ends up speaking angrily to the clerk. And in those erstwhile more simplistic days, when you were more simplistic, either that or you were more erzatzly complex, I would then point out or try to get you to see that which seemed fairly simple, except people cannot remember it because they're not bred to remember it. But to remember that the guy was not necessarily, by any means, arguing at the store clerk. My, no. Think of all the many things that could have happened to that poor man as he left the house. And then, when some of you would go, well, yeah, that's true. You know, it appeared to be psychological. It appeared to be that you can't trust the first impressions of one thing causing another. But then before I would leave it even back then I would point out, well, you see how hard it is to remember such as that? And some of you would go, yeah, sure do. Then I'd say, well, how about this? Not only can you not remember that, you're not bred to remember it. It's not cultural effects, but you're not bred to remember such as that. You're certainly not bred to carry it back any further about, well, wait a minute. The guy standing here arguing with the clerk had an argument earlier with his wife as he was leaving the house, right? Which you thought showed a clear, lineal progression of one thing caused another and caused another, and people just pick out one thing and say, like, the guy shouldn't have spoken so harshly to the store clerk because he's really still arguing with his wife. And then I would try to hint, well, wait a minute, what caused him to argue with his wife? And all of your nervous systems back then said, in essence, in a nice, polite way to me, but you said things like, hey, enough's enough. And we've already carried it further than most people will. I'm already not blaming the man for these harsh words he's speaking right now. We're going back to it happened a few hours earlier, seemed to have caused it. But my God, we've got to stop somewhere, right? Well, speak for your damn self. Now I want you to see, there is nothing episodic. And surely all of you now, you newer people, I'll just treat you as I should, in some respects, that some of this is just instantaneously obvious to you. Just at times it's when I warn you that don't let the simplicity throw you. But there is nothing episodic. But consciousness, because of the way it is, because of needs, looks at life as being a movie, as a two-reeler, a four-reeler. It looks at it as a TV show. It looks at it as a short story. It looks at it as a novel. It's got a beginning. It's got an end. It's got covers on the book. That is episodic. And it looks upon, if we certainly jump down, let's call you the person. And here it is, some kind of great metaphysical mumbo-jumbo that I come flying out of the clouds or my face is hovering up above you that only you can see in the 7-Eleven store. And now you are certainly turn to the guy and you say, give me a pack of long Marlboros. And the guy hands you a short one. You say, I said goddamn long. Are you deaf? Do you speak English? And suddenly, there's my spirit. And I go, if I was this kind of spirit, tut, tut, speaking to your fellow man in such a harsh way, shame, shame, and you went, yeah. And then I said, but what did I point out some time ago? This whole episode didn't start just then when he handed you a regulars instead of a king size. And you go, you're right. And I said, what's happened this morning? You said, well, me and the old lady got in an argument as I was leaving because you've been complaining about me working too much. And I don't know, I seemed upset. And I went, aha! Perhaps no excuse for being harsh, if not dialectic with your fellow man, but now you're expanding your consciousness enough that you realize that you weren't mad at him? And you'd think, yeah. And I could say, finish the sentence. And you go, well, I'm still mad at my wife. And I go, now we're getting somewhere. Why did you get in an argument with your wife? Well, she didn't like me working so much. No. Do you see? Even if you try and take what might at first blush seem to be some sort of psychological scenario, if not explanation, that all right, people don't really do what they're doing right then. That would seem to be just a small step, if not a tripping over from there to good Freudian psychology, good Western psychology, that all right, you may be arguing with a guy out in the 7-Eleven store, but there are unconscious motives involved, unconscious forces. Well, it was as simple as your wife arguing with you this morning, which seems pretty simple, or perhaps just when you pulled in the lot at the 7-Eleven store, a guy backed out without looking and almost hit your new car. That's understandable, right? And you weren't really thinking about the clerk. You just said, hand me a so-and-so. And the guy hands you the wrong thing. You went, hey, good grief. Aren't you listening to me? That might seem to be pretty simple. But also in the Western nervous system, and almost worldwide now, it's expanding, would also be, if it was the feeling, the belief that if it was not that immediate, then it has to do with simply that you're kind of a sore head anyway, right? You go, well, yeah. And there's got to be a reason, right? Yeah. So lay down here, down on the counter, and tell me about your childhood. In other words, if it's not something that seemed to be an immediate cause this morning, then it's obviously what? It is a far-reaching, lingering cause of the way the traumas you've had as a child. The things that have happened in your life brought you to this position today. Right. Do you realize that as long as your life seems episodic, then inconclusive statements are the proper order of the day? So you thought that I'd already left that subject. Not hardly. When you're talking about consciousness dealing with its life in an episodic manner, have I made that clear enough? I keep using examples, and they're not too simplistic for me to say that consciousness, and as always, the heart of this, the meat of this, is not any sort of theory. You don't have to take my word for anything or to listen to my spellbinding speech. All you got to do is look at you. Look at consciousness. Just at any given moment, even right now, it seems episodic. The meeting started. We got the tape going. Had the Kairos ready. Then we turn the tape off. Then I stand up and I comment on the background. I ask sure everything's ready. But life, to ordinary consciousness, is episodic. And for me to use movies or books is a prime example. And I just fear that some of you are missing it because it may seem to be so obvious, but it is much meatier and deeper. That you could find something on your own is why I don't really push it any further. I just throw out movies and books. But think about it. You go pay your money. You're prepared to have fun. Nothing wrong with you. And you sit down, and it flashes on the screen the name of the movie. Assuming they're running the credits in the front or something. The name of the movie, and immediately. Of course, some of them don't even run the name. If I want to make it any simpler, the projector comes on, and there is a guy standing, and he says, Mabel, I told you I wasn't going to take this anymore. And you hear some breathing off the screen you can't see, and the guy pulls out a gun and shoots. And it starts, and you get intrigued. Let's say that you enjoy it. That's episodic. Nobody's life suddenly starts there. Nobody's life suddenly starts there. Now, if you want to play the material world, which you should be doing, this is what I mean by having a kind of ongoing attempted romance with the topography of life as to what in the world are you up to? Why is it that consciousness is such a way that everything is seen episodically? Not only that, but why it seems all right. But look at it very materialistically. For me to go back and play the part of some smart aleck thinker in the city, I could say, well, look, you're almost playing around with the idea of writing your autobiography because you could never do it. You could never stay up to date, even if you got back and started far enough. That is, in other words, if we're going to have a movie, let's say the movie is on the life of Constantine. Harry Truman, anybody. You're going to have to say, the movie's got to start somewhere. What do you want us to do? If we're going to do the life story of Satchel Paige, are we going back to the moment he was born? Well, wait a minute. Maybe we should go back to the moment his parents got down and started looking at each other like they might do it. Maybe the moment of conception. Where are you going to start? Right? Maybe you get somewhere with that. Right? Let's just start when he's actually born. Yeah, what happened the first few months? Can't we save some time? Nah. Right, so you do that. Right. But materially, what I'm saying is, you understand the film. You do understand. The film, Satchel Paige lived to be, whatever he was, 70 years old. You'd go and sit down at that theater and the film would start, and it would take 70 years to show the film, right? All right, let's say they cut out when he was sleeping. And otherwise, private moments has got no business being on the screen. The point is if I was speaking for a city, Yellow Circuit, I could say, well, that's ridiculous because you cannot do that. But, all right, that would be, let's say, at least inconvenient to try and make a film like that, to try to see it. Same way with a book. So you're going to write a book on Harry Truman's life. How many pages? It's going to be take up a library to actually do his life. It's not just that. I was going back and show you that an ordinary Yellow Circuit, if I once formed this, I could say, well, it can't be otherwise. Just materially so. You could not do an actual movie of somebody's life. All right. But the question, if you can go back a couple of minutes, was, all right, that being true, and the Yellow Circuit could say, well, I understand that. You're right. It can't actually do somebody's life. It can't even actually tell a story. If we're going to do the story of Charles Whitman, or who it was, getting up in a tower and shooting those people in Texas, and just suddenly it opens up and it's Charles, and it flashes the date on the screen, whatever it was, July the 12th, 1963, 9:20 a.m. And it shows Charles in bed and his mother saying, Charlie, you're going to be late for class. The thing is, why does it seem all right to consciousness? People don't sit in the theater and say, wait a minute, if I'm going to see this movie, I was interested in that, at least historically, don't just give me the day that this happened. And he's going to get up, and I don't see what you're about to do. You're going through the day and show him take his gun and shoot people, or whatever it is. Why didn't consciousness raise up and say, wait a minute, I want my money back? This film's not going to tell me enough. This film's not really going to do the story. It's not going to give the life of Harry Truman. The movie starts out, it's inauguration night, or it's a convention night, when the second term of Franklin Roosevelt. And it just starts there, or the first convention, and somebody's saying, we should consider that little guy from Missouri. What's that little fucker's name? Somebody says, Harry Truman. Why don't conscience say, wait a minute, don't start there. The man had a life. He was, fooling around with a Pendergrass machine. Something smells in his background. I want to know something about it. It seems all right. Do you follow me? Great books of literature, the great novels. You open it up, and it just starts somewhere. But consciousness jumps right in. Consciousness doesn't say, wait a minute, what happened before this? Of course, everything happened before this, and you can't put it in a book. Everything. I don't mean just everything happened to Harry Truman. Everything happened to everybody before it starts there. But the point is, when I went through all that, you simply got to see. This is no trick. It doesn't take any kind of effort to simply see, all right, now that you point out, I've always done it, and it seemed fair to me. You should find that interesting. Simply on the basis, not much further to look. When I say you can find it interesting, if you've got real eyesight and you see how things overlap, I don't mean to keep looking for months and years for some deeper significance. There it is. Consciousness is constructed in such a way that it deals with life. And rather than just life, say, I tried to give you some breathing room, a place to get started, the arts, movies, books, that it deals in episodics, and consciousness finds it to be proper, never questions it. And it's not cultural. You didn't learn to do this through culture, because there is no such thing as culture. As long as your consciousness accepts life just the way it is now, your consciousness sees everything. Never analyzed it in this way, but I've done it plain and crude enough for you by now. Showing, it is directly analogous with all forms of literature, drama, movies, TV, etc. But consciousness does it in the same way with life, that things are episodic. It doesn't call it that, but you need to see that that is the way consciousness works. There is no such thing, let me go back to the way I put the rule. Nothing is episodic. The guy arguing, or you arguing with a guy, speaking angrily, just for a few seconds to a man in a 7-Eleven store, the apparent anger, this apparent dance going on between you and this total stranger, so it's the first time you've been in there, this dance did not commence. There was not an episode that commenced when you walked in the door of that store, nor is it going to be conclusive when you walk out, no matter what's said. If the guy says, well, hey, don't holler at me, you say, well, hell, never mind. Whatever it is. If the guy says, well, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, and you go, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. It doesn't matter what happened. That apparent episode did not commence when you came in that store, nor is it conclusive, no matter what's said, when you leave. Whether the guy's waving and saying, come back, or whether the guy's saying, hey, don't ever come back. And you're saying the same to you. It did not commence there. It did not conclude there. But to consciousness, it is otherwise. It could, within the next 20 or 30 minutes, you'd be at the office and walk in looking kind of huffy, and somebody with the water cooler say, hey, what's wrong? You say, hell, I don't know. I stopped in the market. You can't even get people. Who are they hiring nowadays? They're hiring people, they make sure they got an IQ at least to their shoe size. These damn people working in a place like that, and the guy says, calm down. You go, yeah, you're right. It's like this was an episode. It's a whole piece of Ralph. It was a little novelette. It was one scene out of a movie. That is your life. But it has its own apparent beginning, middle, and end. That it seems to be to you a conclusive statement. That's what an episode seems to be to consciousness. That you can't open a book, you can't go to a movie, and it just suddenly, just for no particular reason, looked at from one way, this movie just starts in the middle of somebody's life. And then finally it gets to the point that's been about an hour and a half, and they spend enough money. Suddenly the movie is over. And people go, oh, well, I'm glad it worked out. Me too. The music comes up, and the final credits roll. The lights come on, and you go, It was episodic. Although it was minor or lesser episodes in the movie, the experience of the movie, the experience of reading a book, a Balzac, all the way that to a true romance little novel. Whatever it is, it was episodic. It was a story that just, in a sense, arbitrarily started somewhere in life. Apparently, of course, in somebody's life. And then it just arbitrarily finally ends. If there was any useful information, if there was any telling, worthwhile, complex information therein, then such as this would have no life. If life could speak to you on the basis of episodic consciousness, then all of this would be a waste of time. Anything, well, we just wouldn't be here, none of us. Besides it not being episodic, besides the first new rule I was pointing out of a revolutionist camp of nothing is episodic, nothing is cultural. But as long as consciousness sees things as being as episodic, it will perforce see them as being externally, the influence as being externally based. The causes of this episode, the motivations of the episode are cultural, that is, as opposed to genetic. That the guy, all right, did speak to this store clerk in an angry manner, but you're right, nothing is that simple. He was already upset. He was already feeling pressure. A car almost hit his new car. He had an argument with his wife. Today, he's already had inside information, or at least the brutes are floating around the office, that there's going to be a takeover from another company, and there's going to be a large number of middle management people get the pink slip, and today's Friday, and if it's going to happen, it's today. So, there could be some basis out of that range of this particular gentleman speaking in an angry, an untoward, an undeserved, hostile manner toward this helpless store clerk. But it's not his fault. Well, generally speaking, if we're going to be civilized, it's not his fault. Think of the pressure on this guy. Arguing with his wife, he may get fired today. Let me put them all together. And somebody almost hit his new car. And so then it's understandable. We shouldn't do it, but it's understandable. Those kind of external cultural pressures that he could suddenly, to a guy when they hand the wrong thing that they asked for, and him go, "I told you so-and-so." It's understandable. Well, it is, except if you're going to be try and hang around the camp, never become part of whatever the hell this is. It is simply a rule. You can't just say, well, that's understandable, all this almost makes sense, but it's pretty minor. Nothing is episodic and nothing is cultural. And as long as you go along with both of those kinds of views, that kind of very limited, stereoscopic view of life, you can't move. You're not really inside the revolutionary camp, because then everything has the appearance of a conclusive statement. But it's conclusive only on the basis of episodic view. That it's true in this context. It's true you just read this book, whatever it is, a novel. Some young girl that grew up in an orphanage and always dreamed of finding Prince Charming, and everybody tried to, I don't read those novels, but if it was times past, all these evil men tried to get her in bed, and she resisted. And then her Prince Charming finally came along and said, "How many dozen guys you slept with?" And she said, "None." And so he said, "Well, let me marry you, and we've got all the money in the world." This was been true back in the 50s, I guess. And then she says, "Boy, I'm glad I did the right thing." The end. All right. There would be a conclusive statement in there, sometimes known as a moral. There'd be something to learn, but there was a conclusive statement. We could make, I'm of course doing it very simplistically, but on the basis of what little I told there, that virtue will out. It pays to be virtuous. Whatever it is a conclusive statement that the person started somewhere on page 1, their life went along, and then it got to a satisfying to the reader conclusion. The end. Page whatever, but it says the end quite clearly. And you close the book, and on the basis of that being episodic, consciousness takes that as being a conclusive statement. And of course, it is not. Or if you want to try it the other way again, if it is, then what the hell are you doing here? If it is, why doesn't everybody understand everything? If it is, at least why doesn't everybody understand or even suspect what's really going on? See if you can jump a little sideways. That all sciences, all disciplines, all even attempted disciplines, economics, sociology, all the way to that, to the hard physical sciences, they're all attempts to construct a conclusive statement. And they oftentimes, in the world of episodic reality, they appear to. Now, they seem to change over periods of time, but that's looked at as being progress. Looked at as a continuing unfolding, more statistical information in the soft sciences or disciplines. The hard sciences, nowadays, better technology. We can now see a little bit further down the tunnel. We can now theorize. We can construct mathematical formulas that were not possible 3 months ago, before this new mainframe. In the soft sciences, it seems to be we have more statistical information. But they are all a single attempt. It's an attempt to construct, and they're driven to do it. Nobody decided to. They're driven to try and construct a conclusive statement. What goes up must come down. Now, of course, a lot of people, if we were going to go back and play with history, and I could bring us all, we could float over. I can't remember whether Newton's really given credit for actually saying that, but let's just pick him out. We could float back a couple hundred years and look down. There's all kinds of people that, whoever it was that first said, what goes up must come down. There's all kinds of people standing around and went, yeah. You know, like, are you waiting for a hand? I never put in words, but yeah. But the feeling of whoever said that first, and maybe some of the first ones that heard it, he said, I got something to tell you. And he tells the guy, it has a good feel to it. But I'll tell you why. Because it seems very close in the episodic world of the city, as being a conclusive statement. What goes up must come down. There it is. Try it. Everybody knew it. And it just, you want to say, well, by God, that about wraps it up. I feel so good about that. And then there is also this feeling, the more you get into complex areas of life's body where the nervous system is really pushing up into the higher circuits, there continues to be this feeling that in some way these sorts of physical, obvious, conclusive statements must have some possible pertinence in other areas. Or even an unsaid feeling that, all right, if we can conclude one thing for sure, then by God, we're getting on the high road. This whole thing will unravel for us. This whole puzzle can be solved if we once get one thing that we know for sure. And of course, nowadays, what goes up must come down. You know, that's no longer true. I mean, if you're just sophisticated enough to read, I think they call it a science page, in Atlanta papers once a year. If you do that, you do know by now that what goes up does not come down necessarily, because what they used to call up and down is no longer of any great consequence if you're really talking about the hard science of physics. All the way, last time I started out, what little I've mentioned in passing was religions I was pointing out, and all sorts of social theories, political theories, are all attempts to construct a conclusive sentence, which ends up being a kind, and we'll try to get you to help tie some of this together tonight if we got enough tape. It's very close to the search for a constitution of a conclusive statement between something and something else. Trust me. Not literally. Just hang on for a few minutes. You don't have to trust me. That's only pertinent to some of you who don't know me. For you new people out there, that was just a joke again. The conclusive statement. There is a built-in desire. There is a kind of continual, low-level, non-verbal, heretofore unanalyzed, unspoken of, longing, search for a conclusive statement. Religion in the real social, in the widest possible sense, to most people, we're right at the cusp of things changing, but don't take that serious, because if we were standing here, and this was in 1227, we're all huddled around a real campfire, sucking on bark, and I was talking to you, and I'd been saying the same thing, that we're right on the cutting edge of things changing, so don't get all excited. But as far as the kind of effect that what's been called religion, had on the nervous system, I'm saying it's just a period of flux, but up until now, or your parents' generation, at least in this part of the world, religion could be seen as being the ultimate attempt, reflecting the ultimate attempt to feed this need, to feed this longing for a conclusive statement. But you can see it in things, when I was bringing up tonight, that would seem to be about as far removed from religion as possible, and I'm saying that is even the hard sciences. And forget, in the city of talking about intellectual curiosity, that's true, except it's just 2/3 of reality. It's just flawed, it's lacking. I'm telling you, it is through man life attempting to produce a conclusive statement. And in that sense, religion and science are the same thing. Political theories and sports. I hit sports every now and then, but some of you should see one of the ways I can describe the appeal of sports, and you don't even have to be that natively physical yourself, is that every day, every time a game is played, it has a kind of feel among all the things on the news, all the things in the newspaper, of a conclusive statement. They're still fighting in Beirut. Give me a break. The Irish are still fighting the British over what? Potato heads. But you can turn over there and see, it seems so satisfying. Like a good Moreau painting, if you liked him. But it seems to be all wrapped up that the Mets and the Angels are in the same league. The Mets beat the Angels 5-3 in 10 innings. Case open, case closed. That's it. There's nothing you can do about it. You can sit there and think, God, where's this going? It ain't going nowhere. The game's over. You can think. Of course, you can say, well, now what does this portend for the rest of this season for the Angels and all that? I'm telling you, I know that women, I've heard women ponder this, and I've heard other men ponder, like, why in the world would somebody say, wait a minute, in a bar, they'll say, wait a minute, they're going to give the scores of the NBA. Shh, would you turn the set up? And all it is, a guy sitting there, a talking head, and he says, all right, the scores are, and he goes, blah, 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 blah. And you'll see people going, yeah. And it gets through, and you turn to the guy, you have take a sip of beer, and you say, I know what you found interesting. Oh, yeah, I like to keep up with the NBA. What was the score between the Pistons and the Lakers? He doesn't know. He might know one or two teams, his home team, and whatever, if he had some money bet. But he would sit there and listen to the whole thing. Blah, 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 blah. And he'd go, no. And so, but it's almost a feeling that at least somewhere in life there is episodes that have a beginning and a satisfactory conclusion. When I say satisfactory, his team may have lost, but it is conclusive. That game's over. He dropped $10, but he can sit there the rest of the night and go, wait a minute, I bet they got cheated. He can sit there all night. You got to be an idiot. The game's over. They're already on a plane going somewhere else. There's nowhere to appeal to. It's just one game out of 200 or whatever they play. But it seems to have had a satisfactory conclusion. I'm just going to point out that that is a part of the intrigue of spectator sports. It is part of the intrigue of spectator sports. I might also add that there is nothing comparable in the arts. Painters don't play each other. Composers don't play each other. About the closer you got is you can pick up if you heard that they discovered Hindermuth chamber work that they just discovered it and it was being performed last night for the first time. You actually get the New York Times and some critic pans it, but the critic wasn't playing Hindermuth. That is, they weren't in a wrestling match. And so there's really no conclusion. Sports seems to have this every day. Elections in countries that have votes. People that have no real interest in politics. You can see them sitting in bars. And they'll begin to run the election results, and some people say, shh, I want to hear this. And they just got a vague recollection. They mentioned two guys, and the person might remember, oh, I remember that was the guy that they caught in bed with a Girl Scout troop. And so they got no interest. The guy doesn't vote, but it's like, all right, let's see what happened. And the guy got trounced, 2-1. And he's not that interested. He's not that interested, but it apparently was a conclusive statement for the day. Ha! The guy lost. Good enough. Now let me point out another little something that appears to be on the other side of the street. Through man, life is arranged